Welcome to episode 9 of Shark Talk with Alison Towner, a marine biologist based out in South Africa who specialises in the study of great white sharks. Now, we cover a lot of ground in this chat, including orca predations, the fascinating process of a great white shark autopsy, and the many controversies around cage diving, and many other things besides. So enjoy. Alison, it is great to have you on Shark Talk. It's been in the pipeline for a while. A bit of trivia for everyone. You're a Lancashire girl, born and bred. I'm currently living in your neck of the woods. You're into your sport. And of course, we are both into our sharks. So it is a pleasure to have you on and have a good old natter.
Oh, Jem, thank you so much. It feels like it's been, we should have done this long ago, but I think we just spoke about it before going recorded, that the world's now come together, hasn't it, with all this Zoom and everybody sort of going virtual. So, yeah, it's just really nice to finally chat. And, yeah, as much as you live in my neck of the woods, I'm kind of always in awe of all the work you're doing up there and the diving opportunities that you get, and you kind of make me miss home a lot.
Well, you are welcome back anytime. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that. So, Alison, well, you've been on our screens a lot this year, actually. You've been on Shark Week, as you have for many years in the past as well. And you were also on a series that aired in the UK on Channel 4, Work on the Wild Side, which followed scientists, vets, volunteers who moved from the UK to South Africa to work with their chosen animal. Of course, with you, it was sharks, great white sharks. Let's focus in on Gansbaai, because that is where all of your studies have taken place and where your expertise lies, really, isn't it? So could you tell us a little bit about the location and why it has become, has for a long time been a white shark hotspot?
Yeah, I mean, South Africa first really started to protect the white shark in 1991, and that was the start of the cage diving industry. So the amazing thing about Gansbaai is you've got Dyer Island, which is 9 kilometers offshore, and it has 60,000 Cape fur seals in a colony. So no matter on the time of year, there's always an incentive, food species-wise, for white sharks to pass through the region. And, a lot of aggregation sites for great whites are extremely seasonal, whereas this, even though there was seasonality here at play, i.e. numbers would be less in summer than winter, there was always the possibility to find great whites in the region. So in the summer months, actually, there's a whole reef system just close to the beach that's very productive for many types of fish and small sharks and different species that great white, particularly juvenile great whites, would feed off. So yeah, Gansbaai particularly is favourable for the food available to great whites. But then also from an environmental perspective, it has the perfect water temperatures and conditions. So yeah, I mean, the Atlantic Ocean is basically the predominant ocean here, but in winter months when you get a westerly wind, you get the warmer currents from offshore that actually filter in from the Agulhas current that come in. So it stays very, very much within the range that white sharks tolerate. So environmentally and food-wise, it's ticking all the boxes for great whites to move through.
Things have changed slightly of late, and we will move on to that shortly. But before we do, each of these locations tends to have a profile of great white that you're likely to see. I know in Mossel Bay there's a lot of juvenile great whites that frequent the waters there. So could you just take us through the profile of the great whites that you do get in Gansbaai?
Sure. I mean, I would always refer to Gansbaai actually as a bit of a teenage to sub-adult ground. So absolutely, I've seen some enormous great whites in this area. But particularly, it tends to be sort of the, let's say, 3 meter total length to around about 4.5 size range. As summer progresses, then we see a lot more of your sort of juvenile great whites. But midwinter at Dyer Island, I mean, I can remember animals that were clearly over 5 meters. So
wow.
I'd say if you were to sort of classify Mossel Bay as the juvenile site, you could possibly give Gansbaai the teenage ground, and then False Bay the adult ground. I'm calling it back in the day, before the change, let's say. But now, obviously, things are a bit different.
Yes, and before the change, let's talk a bit about predations, because I mean, on Shark Week, we've seen countless predations in False Bay. They tow the decoy often in Mossel Bay. So tell us a little bit about Gansbaai and what you see there in terms of predations and how frequent.
So Dyer Island would be the location you'd see most of the natural predations, but the activity wouldn't really be comparable to False Bay. I mean, you go out to False Bay, Cape Town on a good morning midwinter, And it can be a matter of, I don't know where to look, because every second moment there's a white shark launching itself out the water on a seal. But at Dyer Island, as much as the predations occurred there, it'd be much more spread out throughout the day. So we didn't tend to see such sort of morning versus evening trend for predation activity. However, that's not to say the predations weren't happening there, because there were some spectacular sightings that we got. And don't get me wrong, a lot would be in sunrise and sunset, but also just throughout the day. And actually, a colleague of mine published a paper on this. So what we think is, obviously Dyer Island is, I don't know if most people know this, but it's the only aggregation site or seal colony aggregation site in the Cape that has kelp forest all around it. So Seal Island, Mossel Bay, and False Bay are barren rocks. There's no kelp. And the kelp itself is it's kind of like a buffer zone. So it can be refuge to both the seal, but it can also help the shark remain conspicuous to its prey when hunting. So there's a whole different layer of sort of, I guess, role that the kelp plays within the predator-prey relationship, which might be why we see a lot less structured predation time slots at Dyer versus elsewhere. And we have done quite a lot of tracking studies as well. So my colleague Oliver Jewell also published a paper on comparing Mossel Bay and Dyer Island, so the different hunting strategies of white sharks at both sites. And it does seem that the same great white in a different area will hunt very differently depending on the habitat that it's in. So it could be a function of habitat, but obviously the seals are on a different colony, and they may have different avoidance behaviors, or the sharks may have learned specific behaviors to that colony. So there's always so many complexities when it comes to describing white shark behavior, but it's interesting to note the similarities and the differences.
That is so interesting, and it is an eye-opener. I remember last year when I was swimming in the kelp forest off of Miller's Point, and it did cross my mind, I'm not going to lie, because you do feel very protected and very safe in there, you really do. And it did just sort of make me think, well, you always do need to be aware.
It's primal as well. I mean, I was in the ocean swimming this morning, and I know that we've very rarely seen white sharks here this whole year. But still, as soon as you're in that gloomy water and you're looking below you and you can't see the bottom, there's kelp there, but it's white shark territory. So I think, yeah, it's good to be to be cautious. But a lot of South Africans, particularly surfers, do go by the theory of, oh, well, I can surf there because there's kelp. And that same area of kelp might be where there's a white shark patrolling and hunting a seal the very next day. So it's definitely worth keeping your wits about you.
I think there's a lot of questions linked to the current situation, so we're going to address it now so that I can ask some more questions about it. So
Yay!
The white shark numbers are in flux. It's a big mystery. Yeah. There's a lot of theories. You're at the forefront of all of this, the research, the science, there's so much that you've done. Just paint a little picture for us. What's happened in recent times at Gansbaai?
Yeah, so Gansbaai is a total different story to maybe elsewhere on the South African coast. But I mean, clearly there's an entire shark cage diving industry built around not just sightings of great white sharks, but incredibly reliable sightings of great white sharks. And looking back, I mean, I've collected data since 2007. So we've got a good 12 years, 13 years of solid, consistently collected data. And in 2017, the data points left. That's the easiest way I could describe it. So it went from, wow, lots of data to, okay, very little. And what really changed at that time in Gansbaai was, of course, the presence of the killer whales. But this is what I want to make very clear here. And it's nice that we're having a conversation about this rather than me being interviewed by a journalist or it just sort of being live and then you can't take back what you've said. I've yet to see an accurate journalistic report of the whole South African white shark story because it is a really complex story. I don't think it's just reliant on the fact killer whales came in. I think they're part of very much a bigger picture. And do I think overfishing's behind a lot of the declines in sharks general in South Africa? Absolutely. Do I think it's just one fishery? No, I don't. I think there's many fisheries to blame for it, and not just here, worldwide. There's extraction of oil, there's seismic testing, there's global warming, there's shark nets. I could keep listing them off. So as much as I have observed in one region, in Gansbaai, these are very mobile sharks, and they're not just restricted to this area. In fact, they only have a residency time of a few weeks, maximum a couple of months, before they move off. So it's one big, mobile, dynamic, complex story. And the problem is when scientists or people who are trying to err on the conservative side are hesitant to sort of say it's a mass extinction event or it's just this one reason that's causing the decline, then often from a journalistic standpoint, it doesn't sound urgent, it doesn't sound harrowing, and it sounds too complicated. So often the story just gets put across as being this clear cut. This person thinks this person thinks this, X person has some data saying this, and it just becomes this contrived back and forth of who's right and who's wrong. And that, to me, is really sad to see. And I don't think it's unique to white sharks in South Africa. I think it's everything these days. COVID, climate change. You can actually go and Google reasons behind anything and find validation for it. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I'm glad that you said that, because it's realistic to suggest that it is a combination of all these things. It has to be, you know, there is so much affecting our oceans these days. And yeah, so thank you for making that point. Let's address a few of these issues. Let's talk first of all about the orcas, purely because it's just very interesting. It's interesting what you've actually found as well when you've been looking at these white sharks that have washed up. Could you tell us what is the process? So you get called out, there's a white shark washed up on the shore. What's the process? How do you go through figuring out what's happened?
I wish I could say at the point that it was happening that there was a process, because it was really just absolute shock and disbelief to us all when we heard, you know, there's another large, virtually adult white shark on the beach with its liver ripped out. I mean, it's kind of I guess first and foremost, we want to get down to the specimen. We want to get it into an area that we can just realistically look at it. And obviously white sharks aren't very commonly known to wash out. In fact, very rarely. And this situation in South Africa was the first time ever that orca predated white shark carcasses were available on land for scientific necropsy.
Oh, wow.
So it was a really unique situation. And the first animal that washed in was February 2017, and quite a juvenile animal, and it did still have its liver, but it was covered in these odd, what we now know were orca marks. And it was the day after the 2 killer whales had come through, but nobody at that point was willing to make the call that it was possibly orca, and the specimen got taken to Cape Town to be necropsied by government. I think it still might be in the freezer. So the next time one washed out, this was a very large animal, and we made the call. We got the permission to fly in Dr. Malcolm Smale from the Eastern Cape. So Malcolm Smale is a very well-reputed shark expert. He's actually my supervisor, and he's done more necropsies than any of sort of my team. So even just before the shark gets examined internally, it's a matter of getting every single measurement on its outer body to make sure that we've measured, you know, lengths from fins to tips to. So that takes hours. And Malcolm flew in, and he was actually the one who made the call that, yeah, this is a huge female. She was still reproductively immature, actually, given her size. That was unbelievable. She was minus her liver. She had these very interesting, not sharp teeth marks on her. The interdental spacing were too out. And he made the call, look, that's orca. And then we sent the pictures over to Ingrid Visser in New Zealand, who is a renowned orca scientist, of many different carcasses after that, not just white sharks, but also the seven gills in False Bay. And the injuries were so similar to the ones that she sees on her orca predated sharks there, seven gills. So the process, measurements, and then in we go to establish, are there any signs of trauma that we could discount orca predation? So are there any boat injuries? Are there any fishing line? Obviously, the other necropsies I've done on dead white sharks in South Africa have been angling related. So looking for hooks in mouths, trying to see, is there any source of trauma that could have possibly been the cause of death? But I mean, when the animal's lying there with its 60 kilo, 80 kilo liver ripped out, it was quite obvious. But it's a huge event. I mean, because it's such a rare thing, we're taking all these samples. It takes hours and hours, and you want to make sure you get it right. So yeah, it's a big process each time.
That must have been quite an incredible sight, though, every time, actually, just being faced with that. I mean, the orca situation aside, just seeing a white shark like that, because you get a different feel, I imagine, for their size and, you know, what they are as an animal when they're on land on the table in front of you like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, that first necropsy we did, we invited everybody. So, you know, it was open cards, you know, come and see this tremendous specimen and appreciate her size and have a look at just how magnificent these animals are. We actually have a program with local school children here the DEEP program. So we basically teach them to be little marine ambassadors. And some of these
Brilliant.
children, we're in Africa, they've never been on a boat in the ocean. They've never seen a shark before. So, we invited them and they could come and see and touch and just understand what swims out there, And so as much as it's incredibly sad. I mean, I've been roasted for saying sad because, as a science, you can't have any emotion. You can't anthroposize or anything like that. But I don't care. We'd given that shark a name. She was known in our database from the previous year at Dyer Island. And we got really sort of fond of her. And then there she is without all her glory. Now she's very much dead on a beach with her liver removed. So, yeah, it brings you a lot of perspective to their size. But I'll happily put my hand on my heart and admit, yes, I am a scientist, but I have a heart and I have emotions. And to me, it's sad to see them not alive anymore.
And that's heartening to hear that because as scientists, you're on the forefront of helping to conserve these animals, and it's nice to know that you have that emotional connection to an extent as well, because that's going to motivate your work. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of, Alison.
Just be open. We can all be open here.
Absolutely, exactly. Just before we move on, so the other thing that's quite striking about this is the precision, isn't it? The way that they remove the livers. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. They're just such incredible animals. So, I don't have a background in killer whales at all. In fact, the first time I'd seen them was in 2017, port and starboard. And subsequently, yes, I spent quite a bit of time tracking those too. But learning about orcas and how they behave, I had to really do some reading up, and I spoke to a lot of experts about them. And it's quite clear to see wherever they are in the world, they've learned hunting strategies that, like you say, Gemma, are so precise, so refined, and they're learned and they're taught to their young. So, yes, these injuries that we saw on the great whites were identical to the seven-gill carcasses in False Bay, in that the animals were physically ripped open. And so just underneath sort of the throat area here, so the liver would kind of connect up here. So just below the surface of the skin, it's the perfect place to actually open up the shark so they can access and then extract the liver. So actually, I think it was two of the animals had both the heart removed, and the one male had his testes removed as well. So because they're very close there in the body cavity, so yeah, doubly unlucky. Yeah. But we think possibly the two killer whales, so port and starboard, were learning to, I guess, get hold of the pectoral fins of the shark. We don't know this for sure. This is just speculation based on what Ingrid and other people have described from shark eating orca profiles. But yeah, so it's like a ripping motion. And then the liver, I don't know if you've done a necropsy on a shark before and seen how like oily their liver is. It's just super slippery. And so then it would naturally just slide out, and then they could just come along and just chomp it off and share it. And we've seen all the evidence and the footage of orcas sharing parts of livers of sharks swimming around on various species. But yeah, this white shark predation spree that happened here, I can imagine the orcas were quite well fed after it.
In the end, how many sharks had washed up? I forget the number now.
Now we're on 6 in total, but that's including the one that happened this year. So, and again, identical to the previous ones. The problem is, after this, the white sharks vanish. So, and you don't see them for very long time periods.
So you did a study, and I may be wrong here, but it was your master's, I think, and it was looking at the movement of white sharks in Gansbaai and trying to ascertain whether it's down to cage diving activities, down to environmental factors, or down to their prey. Was that before this orca situation? So were you starting to build a picture before that?
Yes, it was. So we published that. It was actually the first chapter of my PhD. It was back in 2016 now. And it was a look at the natural behavior of great whites in the bay using acoustic telemetry and active tracking. So active tracking, as much as it's like a bit of a laborious method in that you have to be physically out on the ocean following the animals, it is absolutely the best way to understand, particularly on an individual level, what their hunting strategies are and where they spend their time. So we were actually able to, with that study, it was over 500 hours of stalking great whites of all different sizes and both genders. And yeah, just seeing really sort of with age, how the more experienced larger sharks would hunt very successfully at Dyer Island. The large females would do a lot of the patrolling of the kelp edge or the long stretch of beach. But every shark we tracked showed the same trend with cage diving, in that if they visited the boats over, let's say, a series of weeks, all of them eventually would lose interest and then revert back to whatever natural hunting profile they had in the area before inevitably exiting the bay.
It's always been a controversial topic, hasn't it? And it divides a lot of people. Are you conditioning the sharks with the chumming? Are they starting to be more interested in people because they're associating people with food? So it would be great to just get your opinion, your thoughts on this.
So especially when I arrived in South Africa in 2007, there was a whole host of really tragic incidents that had happened just prior to that in Cape Town, in False Bay, Fishhook. So we'd had a whole bunch of human interactions with white sharks that didn't come off too nicely. And that was the question of the hour. Okay, there's chumming out there. Is that then causing the white sharks to associate humans with food and go into coastal areas and particularly target humans? So look, I think it's quite fair to say going forward now that in South Africa, the cage diving industry, particularly in Gansbaai, has been running solidly since 1991, and there's never been a bite incident in Gansbaai, and there's no shortage of people in the water. Apart from Dickie and his friends who are never out the water, there's a whole bunch of, and particularly in December, a whole bunch of people that come on holiday here and they're swimming. Right, in fact, this beach behind me that you see my dogs on, that is the beach that all the white sharks are stacked up in the back line of during summer months, and never have we had a bite incident. I think you would have to be feeding white sharks repetitively for prolonged periods of time with minimal disturbance to even start to see behavioral changes in them. And particularly the areas in South Africa are just so non-conducive to that because the sharks are so transient and actually so uninterested after a few weeks. What interests me is it costs them a lot of metabolic energy to keep chasing this, let's say, bait head that they never really get replenishment from anyway, or if they do, certainly not enough to sustain them calorifically for long. If they go to Dyer Island, just literally a stone's throw away, and they take out 6 Cape fur seals, which I've necropsied one that did that, they're going to get far easier, nicer prey, and it's going to probably not really cost them all the time and hassle. So, yeah, I think it's a really controversial topic, but I'm not a believer that it's connected.
With the cage diving operations, when they're bringing the sharks in with the tuna head, I actually do feel the other way. I've been on a lot of cage dives, so it's probably quite hypocritical of me to say this, but I do actually feel that it's detrimental to the shark because, like you say, they're expending a lot of energy that they need and they're getting nothing for it. And we're encouraging that repeatedly throughout the day, just so we can see the sharks. And it doesn't sit well with me, even though I do still go on these trips. I don't know what you think about that.
So I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be honest and say I think anybody who studied them hasn't had those same thoughts and feelings to whatever extent. But particularly here in South Africa, I think what's really important to remember, I guess, when people consider that is you can go out and you can try and find them and observe them or study them. But look at any scientific paper. They've had to use a surface bait to at least get the shark close to the boat to be able to observe and study. Is there a limit of how much interaction should be allowed with that animal and number of tourists? Absolutely. And should it be very sensitively done, i.e., ethics-wise, should these boats be very closely monitored on how they interact with the sharks? I do believe so. If you go and see the mountain gorillas in Rwanda, for example, you've got an hour with them. And then you're out there. And obviously the gorillas are habituated. They're totally different in the fact that they're not they're very migratory and transient animals, but tourists can always find them and move with them. Whereas the white sharks are only exposed to that on their terms for as long as they stay in said areas. And let's be honest, most of the time they're navigating the high seas and they're nowhere near tourist boats on the coast. So I understand your point there. I'm glad you brought it up. But I want to flip it around and say, imagine if we took those tourist boats out. And I think that's the main thing that people need to understand when they've got that off feeling about, I don't know about cage diving, and understanding the place that it comes from, and more importantly, understanding the importance of it. And if you remove it, what those sharks would be subjected to, that's far scarier. We're looking at societies of people who are so poor that they can't feed themselves. And that shark is really easy to catch. There's no lack of demand for white sharks, for any sharks. In fact, we're seeing plundering numbers of them worldwide. So my, not argument, but my point to add to that always is because I'm going to be honest with you, I also don't like over tourism in any sense. So, but when you've got an animal that's constantly being subjected to a stimulus that it's not getting reward for, that is something that I don't know if it sits well with everybody. So weighing up the pros and the cons and then making the conscious decision. If you don't have the tourism here, you don't have the species. That for me was the game changer. And as long as chumming's done ethically and it's done in a way that you're not drawing them away from areas, they're naturally hunting here anyway. And also, last point, because it is really a really controversial topic, the humans are in the cage, so it's backward zoo. The sharks are there on their own terms, and that for me makes it better as well. I know that those sharks can leave at any point. Nobody's hooking them and forcing them to stay there. Nobody's feeding them. So it's all on their terms.
That's so interesting to think of it from that point of view. That is a very good point, yeah. And the backward zoo thing, yes, thank God. I mean, great whites can't be kept in captivity anyway. They've tried, and luckily failed. So they're hopefully not going to try that anymore in the future. But yeah, that is something that we should do throughout, I believe, the whole backward zoo ethos. I'm going to give you some quick fire questions. What is the most memorable experience that you've had with a white shark?
2008, off the Feldstein, in a little submarine with Andre Hartmann himself. And Gemma, I've never actually free dived out of a cage with great whites, but what we experienced was incredible. So we got to the bottom of the Feldstein. We were on about 20 meters. Andre lifted the lid open of the sub. So we're both sat there with our regulators looking around, and there was massive white sharks everywhere. One of them particularly just swam so close over us, that white underbelly. And, you literally, I mean, I felt so safe because I was with Andre, but it was just, still to this day, I get goosebumps thinking about that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that feeling that there's nothing between you and the shark, that must have been incredible. Next question. Top 3 sharky must-dos or must-sees in South Africa.
You have good questions, Jem. I must say, I've done a few of these live and recorded interviews, and these questions are tip-top. Okay, top 3 must-dos shark-wise at the moment. Still never seen a tiger shark. It's unbelievable. But I've dived Aliwal Shoal in peak time. I was there just a few weeks ago. To me, every time I try and get in the water and dive with them, they're either too deep or they're not there or they were seen the day before. So I would love to see a tiger shark. I've seen a Makos shark before. We were offshore with Mornay off in the deep, and I know you've done that too, Gemma,
yes.
So you know exactly what I'm talking about.
It was amazing.
But it was such a fleeting visit. This Mako was super in and out. I'd love to have just seen it a little bit longer and see that iridescent blue colour, and so spend a bit longer with a Mako because they are here.
Yes.
You got them as well when you're out there, hey?
Yeah, we were so lucky because they hung around for a long time, and we had 3 of them. I couldn't believe it, actually. I didn't think we'd even see one, and just to have the 3, and also to be able to compare their behaviour with the blue shark, because they are chalk and cheese, the 2 of those.
Even though they're similar in colour, they are chalk and cheese in behaviour, yeah.
Absolutely, and it was very interesting, and they actually did eventually, because they stayed with us for such a long time, they grew in confidence, and then in the end they were coming right up to us, so we got an amazing look at them, and a little taste for their speed as well, because every now and again they'd sort of fly off and something spooked them, and you just get an idea of, okay, yeah, they can reach some serious speed. So it was very cool. So yeah, definitely I support that on your must-do list.
Makos Tigers, and then, all these charismatic species get all the attention, but the Pajama Cat Shark, when it ambushes, and it sits and waits and ambushes like chocker squid that are laying eggs, or even other mollusks, I would love to actually just sit in the kelp with a nice camera, just parked off and just observe that kind of behaviour. And actually even not just so down the lens of a camera, more so just from a meditative value, just look at the interaction.
And actually, you're right. The experience of just being in the kelp is so different because it feels like a community down there. I don't know if you know what I mean, but it does.
I do.
It feels like you've kind of just, you've just dipped into their world and they're just going about the business. And it's just a different vibe. You're not out there in the big blue and things come and go. You're in their little world, and you're a visitor, and it's a really cool feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a spectacle that I think is going to start to become more popular now, is the kelp forests of the Cape.
Yes.
So it'd be really cool to see people come down here and get more involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you do ever do that and you do take a camera, make sure you share the footage because I want to see it.
Well,
be very cool.
Next time you're here, we'll go. Simple.
Done. It's a deal. Top tip for aspiring marine biologists out there?
I would say, yes, academia is super important, and yes, the grades and the papers and the stats and all the desktop stuff is absolutely vital. But getting field experience is as important. And so what we end up with is a lot of graduates that come out with loads and loads and loads of qualifications from the sort of land point of view, but going to sea, very little experience. And there are so many incredible projects that you can get yourself involved in to just get yourself out there and get exposed to the ocean. And, even without doing anything, being on the sea and making observations, looking at, I think, as you said, Gemma, how things that one animal relates to another, it's a whole community out there. So just becoming versed in the environment that you're in. And you can do programs anywhere in the world, but don't overlook that, because marine biology, yes, it is a lot of desktop work, but what's the reason you're studying it for? I mean, it's a diverse field, but so I would say go and get involved, do some volunteer work, or join an academy that you can do skills-based training and learn, the field skills and the practical side of things, how to skipper a boat, or how to rig a bait line, or help fix an engine, or these things that are going to become very important if you do go into the field and your work does become field focused. So, and it's the fun stuff. So yeah, go do some experience.
Brilliant advice. Thank you for that, Alison. It's been an absolute pleasure and a joy chatting with you, and I may well schedule another Shark Talk with you if you're up for it, because there's more that I'd like to have asked, but we can save that for another time.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you everybody for watching another episode of Shark Talk, and please do feel free to subscribe, like, share, all of that. We do appreciate spreading the awareness and the shark positive messages. So Alison, thank you, and goodbye everybody.
Thank you, Gemma. It's been an absolute pleasure, and bye everyone.